All right, when we last left off at Esther 4, Mordecai was wailing at the gate with all the other Jews wherever the commandment had gone that they would all be put to death, annihilated, perish. So what then ends up happening is Esther ends up hearing about this and she wants to know what's going on. So she sends clothes to Mordecai because if you recall, he had rent his clothes and he was living as the poor. Now, perhaps this is because earlier readings had indicated that you couldn't enter the king's gate in sackcloth, so maybe she wanted to talk to Mordecai. But Mordecai wouldn't have it. He was like, no, I'm not going to take the clothes. I'm here to pray. I'm here to wail. I'm here to mourn over this Holocaust that Haman is bringing upon all of the Jewish people in Shushan. So what ends up happening is Esther chooses Hatach, who's going to become our middleman in all of this. Poor Hatach, he's got a lot to do. And he runs to Mordecai to say, hey, what's going on? So Mordecai gives Hatach no simple commandment, right? He tells him about the declaration that Haman did. He says, take it to Esther, tell her that this is absolutely crazy and that she's going to be charged with going before the king. She's like, you need to go before your husband and you need to tell him this isn't right and it's wrong. So Haddock brings the decree. I guess I should say that too. So Haddock comes back to Esther in the palace, running between the front gate and the palace, right? And he tells her all of this. He shows her the decree. He says, this is what Mordecai says. And Esther is like, well, wait a minute. There's a law, right, in the kingdom that if you go before the king without being summoned, that it's like treason. You're going to be put to death. And on top of that, Esther calls out between Haddock to Mordecai that the king she hasn't seen in 30 days. And let's chat about that for just a second as we talk about this background in Esther 4. Right? So when you think about Vashti, the first queen, that was the third year of the king's reign when he basically got rid of her just because she wouldn't come before his party. And Esther at this point has been married to the king about 5 years. So there's got to be this thing in her head being like, my clock might be ticking, right, with the king. And then he hasn't seen her in 30 days. He hasn't called for her. So if you think of your spouse, of your partner, of your husband, what if they didn't call you for 30 days, right? And you could only reach out to them if they did. What kind of thoughts would run through your head? This is why it's so hard being a woman, because focused on relationship, right? The caregivers, being compassionate. And here men can so often withhold the interaction because they're accomplishment based, right? So it isn't about the daily interaction for them. We've talked about this before. It's more about accomplishment. So that can really play on someone's mental health, on the situation. And I believe that's what's happening to Esther. She's like, gosh, I know I can go before the king and he might kill me. But also he might banish me. He might take away everything. My life is just one thing in this palace of all these other things. And it is interesting here, right? We've got a woman who has a decision to make, to decide whether it's part of being the palace and the queen and all this luxury that's come her way, or if it's really about what Mordecai's going to tell her next. Because when Haddock goes back and relieves this message to Mordecai, Mordecai sends back probably what we would consider to be one of the key points in Esther, right? And it's Esther 4, 13, 14, but really the end of 14. He says to her, well, you must do this. Don't think of yourself, right? Think of your people, because this annihilation, this Holocaust, it isn't just going to be your death. If you go before the king, you may die, right? But if this goes forth, your family will die. Your fathers will die. All your people will die. So he says to her, hey, don't think of yourself here. And also, the message that I really believe is key for all of us is, maybe you were created for a time like this. Isn't it odd that in this time of this annihilation of the Jews, right, this Haman's Holocaust, that the queen who happens to sit on the throne, who's won the favor of the king, is a Jewish woman, is Hadassah, right? And in her Persian name is Esther, right? So isn't that odd? Isn't that weird? Isn't it isn't it odd that you were that right age to be in the harem, that you were liked by the eunuchs, that you were brought to the king, that he favored you, that you became queen? What if you were created for a time like this? And I'm going to pause there and say to you, what if you were created for a time like this? Right? What if you were created at a time where things are difficult? So often when things are difficult in our lives, we think, gosh, I must not be working in God's will. But that's not necessarily true. What if you are? Right? Sometimes God's got to stir up the waters so that things become clear again. So Esther takes what Mordecai says in this, what if you were created for a time like this? And then she asks all of her handmaids, and she sends Haddock back, poor Haddock again, running back and forth, and tells Mordecai to gather all of the Jews, and that she's going to do it too, and that they're going to fast for 3 days, neither eat nor drink. Now let's talk a little bit about why that's really key here. Because one, our entire time has been about parties and feasting in Esther, right? Lots of drinking, lots of eating. So all of a sudden, there's this moment in the middle, really the kind of the middle of the book for me, where it's like, whoa, pause. Now it's going to be about fasting. And any feasting, any celebrating we do moving forward, it's going to be because we stopped to fast, because we paused. And what is fasting when we talk about it in the Bible? Fasting is prayer. You don't just fast to fast. You don't fast just for the sake of like, oh, I'm not going to eat. When we're fasting in the Bible, what we're really talking about is prayer, is turning to God. So that's really key. So here we're going to have this pivotal moment in Esther where we're going to stop all the activity. We're going to pause. That's another good message for us, because we were created in such a time like this in order to turn to God, to pray, right? And the other implications there, right? So Esther, this entire time, it's been about looking good, eating those good foods, getting that sun, right? So her fasting before she may go before the king, because that's what she's going to say next, right? It's going to affect her appearance. So that's dangerous. And then let's talk about another point, neither eat nor drink. So it was common to maybe fast from food, maybe from wine, but water meant a lot in this time. It was hot. There were a lot of illnesses. So to not drink water risked a great risk of physical dehydration. So all of those reasons are why when Esther says, hey, we're all going to fast, right? Blow the trumpet, gather the children, and it's time to have like a congregation, right? And an assembly here. That's from Joel, by the way. So I think so. I was close there. Sorry. But so that's what Esther does. She takes this moment to say, hey, let's pause and let's fast. And then she sends back to Mordecai, I'll go before the king. And if I die, I die. And if not, we'll see what happens. But first, we're going to take this time with God. We're going to fast with him because, yes, my father figure, Mordecai, I was created for such a time as this. What a cliffhanger. Huh? We'll talk more about Esther, dive deeper into the scriptures on Sunday with chatting at Cheesman. Happy Thursday. It's Thursday. Happy Thursday.